So welcome, everybody, to the Center for Ballet and the Arts. I'm Jennifer Homans. I'm the director of the center, and I'm very, very happy that you're all here tonight. We have a wonderful evening, as you know, and we're here to welcome the great Edward Villella. I'm going to talk for just a couple of seconds, and then we are going to proceed. Edward Villella joined the New York City Ballet in 1957. I'm going to steal a brief story from him in order to introduce him. At a moment when the company was actually in some state of crisis, Balanchine's then wife, Tanaquil Leclerc, had the year before come down with polio, and Balanchine had been away from the company for almost a year. So when Villella came in, there was actually a moment where out of this crisis came an explosion of creativity and new work. And one of those new works was Agon, as most of you know. Now, Eddie was not in the original cast of Agon, but he quickly went into the role of Todd Bolander. And soon after one of the early performances, Lincoln Kirstein came up to him and said, "How'd it go?" And he started to do what all dancers do, I think, which is to say what happened on stage that night. And from what he told me, Lincoln stopped him at a certain point and just said, "Make your own comment." And then he turned around and left. And so what I thought is that tonight we're here to talk to Villella and to hear what his own comment was, to understand how that evolved over the course of the next couple of decades in which he danced for the New York City Ballet, retiring in 1979. The evening will have the following shape. We are going to show a short 5-minute film that was made on the occasion of the Kennedy Center Honors, which awarded Edward Villella a Lifetime Achievement Award in 1997. It's basically a way of just giving you a brief sort of bio and a few pictures. So make sure you carefully look at the pictures, especially of Prodigal Son, which we will then later discuss. Then Edward and I are going to have a conversation, which is going to be mainly Edward talking and me just being present a little bit. And then after that, we will open the floor to you so that you have a chance to ask questions, contribute thoughts, memories, ideas, anything that comes to your mind that you'd like to contribute. Obviously, the career of Edward Villella is a huge one. We are not going to be able to cover all aspects of it tonight, but we will try to get to several of the ballets that he worked on, especially with George Balanchine, including Prodigal Son, A Midsummer Night's Dream, and the Ruby section from Jules. We will hopefully get to some Robin's dances too, and we will be showing you some film footage from Midsummer Night's Dream and from the Ruby section of Jules. So before I bring Edward on the stage, just so that we can show the brief film, we're going to dim the lights, show the film, and then we will begin.
I have the feeling of being set free. His Italian family lived in Queens, New York. Eddie was their all-American boy. Hard playing, hard hitting, he was a scrappy little fellow with big league ambitions. And then his mother dragged him to dance class with his sister. He just loved it, and danced his way into the ballet school of George Balanchine. They called him the boy who could fly. A boy dancing was one thing, but he was coming up on manhood. His parents said, "Enough, college now." He found the gym. Not one dance step in 4 years, yet he thought of nothing else. Without telling his parents, he sneaked back to the New York City Ballet, pushing himself to make up for lost time. Before long, everyone was saying it. He's back. He was an event from the moment he first took flight. He gave himself over body and soul and danced with total abandon. A murmur swept through the house the instant he appeared on stage. Then came the night his parents, in the best seats he could afford, looked down and cheered. He was entrusted with a legendary role. Balanchine called it an old coat he was lending to a young friend. Put on the prodigal son, he said. See how it fits. He drew the role into himself. He showed us a human soul in turmoil. Now he was the legend. Quite simply, he had created a new style of dance for men, a fusion of old elegance and new exuberance. If this was ballet, Americans were saying, give us more. He attracted an entire nation to the dance. He was the most famous male dancer American ballet had ever known. But even Villella could not keep up with himself forever. His punished body finally gave out. But there was dance within him still. It was all he thought about. Miami, Florida was miles and years from center stage. It had no ballet tradition. When they asked him to start a new company, he jumped at the chance.
Enter. Now don't change.
He had found a new way to dance. He took these kids and forged them into a glowing troupe they called the Miami Miracle. What must he think as he watches them perform? That dance is well and good, and that his every step has counted.
Okay. You could have the lights. Edward Villella, ladies and gentlemen. You choose. So, I just want to say before we begin, you have a full bio, or at least a partial full bio, on your chairs, courtesy kindly of Robert Greskovich, who's, I believe, here tonight. So that's why we won't have to go through all of the many, many ballets that we did. But let's start, if we may, with Prodigal Son.
Sure.
So, you know, the interesting thing to me about this ballet, in a way, is when you were first cast in it in 1959, so just 2 years after you joined the company, Balanchine wasn't his favorite ballet. It's not like it was a ballet that he wanted to necessarily invest in? He had done it in the 20s. He wasn't sure that he really cared about it so much. Why did you care?
Well, first of all, he hated it.
You hated it.
He had a terrible problem with Prokofiev, and he was forced to do this. So it was not his sense, idea, where he wanted to go. This was a chore for him. Prokofiev had thrown him out of a theater once. And to listen to him talk about it was very funny. I can't make it funny, but he said, you know, dear, he threw me in the curb. So he said to me, okay, I show you, but you stage it from now on. And he came, he showed me the pas de deux with Diana Adams in about an hour, then a half an hour on the variation, and I never saw him again. And I had just come out of a military college, so I wasn't fully prepared to do a title role, I mean, needless to say. But my God, when I started to listen to the score and started to learn and try to do all of these gestures, needless to say, I was fascinated with it. And I studied it because I didn't have any internal guidance with all of this, other than the pas de deux and the variations. And it took me a long time to figure it out. Probably by the third performance, he came backstage and he was trying to show me the opening of the pas de deux.
Explain what the pas de deux is.
Well, the pas de deux, we all know the biblical story. And I was the son, I leave, I go tearing off, and I go into the wilderness. And he runs into these characters who then get him involved with a siren, this gorgeous, lengthy siren, who ends up seducing him and taking all of his money. So this is the beginning of the seduction. And I couldn't get the angle of what he was trying to do and everything. And he probably showed me 3 or 4 times. And then he got exasperated and he said, Byzantine icons, dear, Byzantine icons. I'm like, oh, wow. And quite frankly, in a military school, they don't teach you about Byzantine icons. So
or in Bayside, Queens.
From Queens, hey, we didn't do that in Queens. Anyway, I go and get every book I possibly can on Byzantine icons. And as I'm looking in the book and reading about it, suddenly I see the entire port-de-bras of Prodigal Son.
Can you show us what you mean by that?
Well, sure. I mean, I'm just with the siren going up like this. It's like a snake.
Yeah.
You know, you see in the Byzantine icons, and where he is after the seduction. I mean, he's out there begging in the streets, and you see all of these kinds of gestures that were there. So that gave me the sense and idea that there was so much to learn about this. And I went so far as to find out what the basis of the work was. It was, he had based it on Russian constructivism, which was a big thing at that time. It was the first reaches of modernism, which didn't come to America until Lincoln Kirstein brought him and art and modernist culture. So, you know, just having found that out and thinking about it, I mean, those of you who don't know the ballet, downstage left is a fence, which represents where he is going to depart. And that fence becomes a table. And then that table becomes a crucifix. And that table then becomes a boat. And then it gets back to being a fence. So that in itself, I thought was so incredible and so brilliant from that time, from that period. So I had to invest myself in all of this to find out what I could bring to it. You know, Lincoln said, make my own comment, but you don't make your own comment until you have studied the comments that went before you. And that's what ballet is about. I mean, Balanchine said, you know, ballet is a passing art form. You pass it from body to body, but you pass it from mind to mind. And that's been my privilege, is that I came with no knowledge, and I was terrified, so I invested in finding out. I found out, first of all, I didn't know how to do a bar after 4 years, so I had to figure out the technical approaches to this. But then, the year I joined, he had done Agon. He'd done Agon, Gounod Symphony, Square Dance, and Stars and Stripes in one season. I said, what have I gotten myself into? This guy is way beyond me. So I knew I had to understand this stuff. And
did you work with at all with the other prodigals who had come before you, with Jerome Robbins or Mancione or?
No. I was left out there. And that was very much Balanchine. You know, he wanted, Arlene Croce once said to me, I told her this story, and I said, I just, to this day, don't understand why he didn't break it down for me to give me a point of departure. And she said, well, maybe he wanted to see what you would do with it. And that was very much him. He gave you, but you had to find out. He rarely ever talked about his work. Certainly not with me, maybe with the ladies. He liked the ladies. He liked the ladies very much.
So did you get a sense, do you have a sense, as you reflect on it later, why he thought you were the prodigal son? I mean, why did he cast you?
Well,
what was in you that he...
One day he told me, there were a number of critics when they had found out that this guy was going to do, this kid was going to do Prodigal Son. They said, why are you giving that to him? And he said, well, you know, dear, he looks like a nice little Jewish boy.
So if we take that as a point of departure and we start actually at the end of the ballet, which he often did, I think you've said, right? At the end of the ballet, the father, the son, of course, comes home, and the father is standing by the house as the son is making his way. I should let you describe it. I will let you describe it. After he's been through this entire seduction, disruption, adventure, he's gotten really dirty, and he's making his way. He's practically half dead, right?
Yeah.
And then, so my question really is, you know, can you describe that scene for us, how it felt for you doing it, and then tell us a little bit about what kind of prodigal son this was and what kind of father it was welcoming back.
Well, it was very new to me and fascinating, because I thought ballet was a physical conversation that you shared with an audience. And that last whole scene is nothing but he crawling.
Right, he crawls, literally.
Literally. My knees can tell you, we still remember. So going from this crazy scene of seduction, and now it's all over, and he has to crawl off the stage. Then the boat scene arrives, and they all leave, and the prodigal comes out with his staff, literally on his knees, and is seeking home. And he's constantly looking and trying to find where he is, and he's just looking where he's going, and then he has sort of, am I? Then he finally sees where he is and runs on his knees, falls down. Then he gets to the fence, and he can't quite get to it. And he grabs the staff and bangs it, kisses it, and falls. And then, I'm sorry, I do that well, I've been trained. And then, because of the staff hitting the fence, the two sisters come in and get him through, and it's like a religious moment. And he stumbles through that and looks at his sisters, and then he sees where he is, and then he goes down. Wow. And then the music changes, and that's where the father arrives, sees his son is there, walks downstage on a parallel with his son. And the son gets up and sees his father. And there are 3 moments in the music where he is begging, please take me back. And he suddenly sees that's not going to happen. And then another moment, sweetest, most beautiful moment, his father offers his hand to his back. And you can hear that, and he turns and goes, oh, oh. And then continues his journey into his father's arms. And his father ends with putting the cape over and starts going up to the tent.
And then the curtain falls.
Yeah.
So do you see the ballet as a tragedy?
Well, it begins as a tragedy, but it ends so beautifully and so wonderfully, and the forgiveness.
So you felt there was real forgiveness at the end?
Oh.
And love. Because the father figure as opposed to in the biblical story, is quite, he doesn't move. You have to actually climb into his arms. Mm-hmm. He's quite rigid. He's not embracing you or running up or celebrating your return.
No,
there's a way in which you have to come to him, and he is... You have to physically climb up into his arms.
Yeah, there's a moment as he's going towards his father, and he loses his equilibrium and falls down. And now he's about a foot away from his father, and he reaches and grabs the back of his ankles, and that begins the journey up his body. And it's choreographed in a crazy way. It doesn't look it, but it really is. Exactly where you put your hands, how you get up, when you get his wrists, how you get up to his shoulders, and then at that moment, under the...
he scoops you up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you're right about there, he scoops you up.
Now that's a role that Balanchine himself sometimes played, the father role. Did he ever do it while you were there?
No.
I don't think so. That was a little earlier time, right?
Yeah, earlier time.
But you knew that.
Actually, I don't.
You didn't? You didn't know that?
Illuminating for me.
Yes, he did play the role sometimes. I don't know what that tells you. But
at this stage of the game, I don't know.
What about the siren? That you've described a little bit, pas de deux, and I'm just curious because it seems to me that in these ballets, sometimes in Balanchine ballets people say, well, he changed things all the time, but there are certain moments that are sort of it seems to me dramatically crucial.
Well, bless his heart, he changed the variations for me. I was a jumper. And Jerry was not exactly a jumper, nor was Francisco Monsieur. So he said, well, now I've got a jumper, let me use what's there. And so I was terrifically grateful for that. But the whole point of that is, how do you jump? There are 2 similar variations. And the first one, he's all, his sisters want to grab him, and he says, no, listen, this is my moment of freedom. I'm going to get out of here. I'm going somewhere else. And then he finishes that, and he runs to the tent screaming. And as he gets there, the father opens. So he's yelling in his father's face. And so the prodigal, needless to say, is devastated, and he goes back, and then the father gestures to him and says, "Get here," and he gets there with the two sisters, and he goes through old Jewish law and all of this sort of stuff, and he wants to get out of there. He forces his head down again, and then finally he says, "No more of this," and I'm getting out of here, and he gets up, and now he's angry. So the approach to those variations has to be different. You have to have a different body language, if you will. But mostly you have to have awareness in your mind as to how you then approach all of these things. And then he ends up and basically defies his father, jumps over the fence, and makes one last scream at his father and falls into the wings. So it's sometimes people refer to it as a dated. Well, the period is dated, the style is dated, and so on, but the inventions are incredible.
The story is certainly not dated.
Just amazing inventions. Throughout the work, I mean, there's a moment when all the goons, or as he called them, protoplasm, they all get together in a circle, and one guy is in the middle, and the rest of them are like this, and they go around. And it looks like a big machine. So the line is there, the Russian constructivism. When the goons, the protoplasm, first come out, they're doing this, and it's like a train. And of course, in those days, a train was, that was a
big deal.
Yeah, it's a big deal. So all of these details and things that were there, which sort of bothers me a bit now. I have the pleasure of going and coaching these roles from time to time at Joffrey and here and blah, blah, blah. And I'm amazed at the lack of detail. So I'm very happy to restore those things. And that was one of the reasons why I accepted to be a founding artistic director in Miami, because it was the only place that offered me to make a company from the ground up. And the first 7 years, I did mostly Balanchine. And I wanted to train a group of people who had never seen Balanchine, didn't know anything from it. I couldn't get people from SAB, they all wanted to be somewhere else. And it took me 3 or 4 years before the word got out that this was, something that could be interesting.
So, let's go, on that note, if we can, before we jump forward, the whole idea of training and the way that you learn to train yourself, maybe we should move on to Midsummer Night's Dream and we can watch the Scherzo and then talk a little bit about that, because that's such a virtuoso role that way we can actually have something to look at.
Okay.
Could we show the Midsummer Night's Dream clip that we have? It's about 3 minutes long.
Do we have to get out of it?
I think we can. Can you see? I think you can stay, right? You can stay, unless you want to see it.
makes me makes me tired to watch it.
So there you are as Oberon, a role that it was surprising for you to be cast in, am I right?
I was stunned. When I first heard about it, the first thing I thought was Puck. You know, I'm going to be Puck. And then one day Balanchine comes up to me and says, you know, Oberon, you know, king of the fairies, going to be just great, going to be fine, dear. So, okay.
And this is 1962, so we're not even that far from Prodigal, right?
And again, I had little experience, and one of the things I had never done in my life was mime. And
had you read Shakespeare's play? Did you know the play?
Pardon
Did
me?
you know the play?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I knew the play. But that's a whole other world you want to get into or talk about. So anyway, he would, you know, as we were going through the ballet, or he was going through the ballet and choreographing, it was pandemonium. It was the first time a work of that dimension had been done. I mean, it was huge. Entire company and kids and this and that and the other. So he had to rush everything. And he would get to my mime stuff. He says, you know, you come in here and then you call Puck. And then, you know, Puck comes in, you give him a kick, and then, you know, you go off. We'll do it later. And I have the whole first act with all of these entrances. Oh, we'll do later, don't worry, don't worry. Oh, Jesus. And I used to fall asleep under the piano because I had nothing to do. He hadn't done a step for me. And I would literally fall asleep. And about 4 days before the premiere, he did those variations for me. And then I think we were 3 days out, 2 days out, and we had an orchestra dress. So I go out there and I make my entrance, my cape, and I do all this stuff. And then the mime stuff starts, and I'm faking it, man. I'm really faking it like crazy. And at the end of this, Lincoln Kirstein comes up to Stanley Williams. Stanley Williams is a great, great teacher, and he became a pal of mine, and he basically changed my life and straightened all of these things out for me. And Lincoln says to Stanley, you know, Balanchine thinks he's going to ruin the ballet. So Stanley said, we want you to talk to him because he's so difficult. And Stanley said, he's not difficult, he's easy to talk to. No, he's very, very difficult. No, you have to talk to him. So Stanley comes up to me and he said, what is going on? He told me I'm going to ruin the ballet. And he said, I said, well, you know, I don't really know what the hell I'm doing. And this mime stuff, I really don't know. And he said, okay, show me what he showed you. And he said, well, he said, you know, call Puck. And immediately he said, no, it's not how you mime. Because it has to register with an audience. Because if you do this, if you blink, you miss it. So you have to let it register and then move on. So once he said that, you know, then I kind of already had a sense and an awareness, and I knew what was going on in the ballet. So I could incorporate now this thing about letting it stay before I would move on. So that helped tremendously. And then the opening night comes, and you know, we all dance, and it's a big success. The ballet's a big success. And the next morning, I could hardly stand up. I'm hanging on to a cold pipe at City Center and backstage, trying to get my bones going, and moving my joints and all of this stuff. And he comes walking in. He's got the Daily News under his arm and his trench coat. He sees me, he walks past, he stops, turns around, looks at me, walks over to me, puts his arm around me and says, you know, dear, you danced excellent last night, excellent. Now, to get a compliment from that guy like that. So it, you know, no matter how complicated anybody thought he was, he moved you along. He had you in mind. You know, he built roles for you like that. And I'm so grateful for the stuff he gave me.
Now, what was so hard about that variation? I mean, it looks hard, I can see, but tell
It is hard.
Yeah.
No, you see, you have to understand Balanchine and his approaches to it and his points of departure with everything. For instance, there are generally two kinds of pliés. It's the Russian plié, where you squeeze out the plié and you lengthen the music to squeeze out that plié.
So the plie, right?
A plié is a knee bend that you land
Like
on.
you're bending your leg,
Yeah.
right?
I can't use this. I just had that scope. So,
I'm not a dancer anymore either, but I can.
so anyway, you have this landing with Balanchine and also Bournonville. It's the same. The plie is not an ending. The plie is a beginning. So the point is that as you land, see, we don't land like this. We land over. You put your knee over and you cushion your landing. Now, the Russians would then squeeze this. And the Balanchine plie is the beginning of the next. So the speed is the crucial and critical aspect of anything you do with Balanchine. You have to know how to get all of these things going. And once you have that, it opens a whole other world for you. And because I could jump and because I could deal with speed, this was really terrific for me because he used everything that I was capable of doing. And that's what he did with all of us. You were never uncomfortable in a Balanchine ballet if he made it for you. Poor guys after you. that was something else he did. You noticed that was a real scherzo. And I would go back and take a look at it every now and again, and the tempo was because, again, if you didn't have that quickness in the ankles, in the feet, in the toes, it was very hard to do.
Yeah. And what's the dramatic purpose of that variation? Can you even say?
Yeah, he said, you know, he told me I was Oberon, king of the forest and the fairies and all of that, and he said, you know, dear, it's like Oberon skimming over the forest. Mm. And if you remember this step, I mean, that is probably the most difficult step in all of that. But to do it at that speed is almost impossible. So, you know, it's, again, like anything else, he never made you look bad. He gave you stuff right up to there.
So skimming over the forest, so in other words, the steps, as you described the plie, are barely touching the ground, and that means you're kind of skimming the floor of your own forest.
Yeah, and just going backwards like that, you know, there's a lot of speed in there. That's like zooming over the forest.
Right.
So I mean, he never did a step without reason. He had a wonderful phraseology, which was, there is nothing new under the sun. Everything is there. And it's incumbent upon man to discover. And once you discover, then you invent. He said, nobody creates. I don't create, God creates. So, and one time he broke a roll down for me. And within that major variation, he gave me about 6 different points of departure.
Which role was that?
Apollo. That was stunning. Absolutely stunning. First of all, he came to me and said, I want you to learn Apollo. I think you have potential. Mr. B, why? No, go learn it. You know, everybody's 6'2". I'm not 6'2". No, go learn it and show it to me. So I go, I learn it, I come back, and I show it to him. And he said, no, dear, it's not Apollo. I went, oh, God. I said, but Mr. B, it's the steps and the counts. Ah, steps and counts, but there's no poetry in your gesture. And he said, I will show you. The man was about 65 at that time. He had a double-breasted gray suit on with a cowboy shirt and a cowboy tie and loafers. And he gets up and he dances this thing for me. And I was blown away because it was magical. Absolutely magical. And I knew, wow, what I had to learn, but what I had to learn, I didn't know. And he could see that my face, and I was going, where do I start with this sucker? You know, how, where? And he said, you know, let me tell you, dear. He said, Apollo, you know, he looks up and he's looking up to Zeus, his father. I went, oh, okay. Now that gesture had a meaning for me. And he does a gesture like this and comes down. And he said, you know, it's like eagle on a crag sweeping down from a, I went, my God, an eagle, wow, wow. What a point of departure. That's very interesting. And then when Apollo gets up, he starts going around, and he said, you know, it's like Matador watching the bull go by. I got an eagle and a matador. And then he said, you know, then he said, soccer step. Now I got an athlete. Oh my God, then chariot step, chariot driver. So everything he did came from somewhere. And
so he's not actually telling you how to do it. He's giving you these images,
yes,
which you're then investing the movement with the energy that you find from the imagery.
Exactly.
And building it from there.
Yeah. And to
so it's not really a story. It's actually a series of
you see
impulses.
It's not anybody's Apollo. It's a Balanchine-Stravinsky Apollo, and that's very different. And I had seen a lot of, you know, Apollos and so on, and they were very stately, and they posed a lot. And the last thing he said to me was, you know, dear, Apollo's a rascal. And I finally realized why maybe he wanted me to learn this. So, you know, and then there's the moment when he finishes his variation. He's calling Terpsichore, puts his finger out like that, and she comes and does this and looks the other way. And then he said to me, you know, dear, Michelangelo got that from me.
You know, how much did he know about your background, about your childhood, about your family, your father, your Italian roots?
You know, inside of 10 minutes, he basically knew you. The guy was, you know, we all think he was a genius because he could do steps in music, but he once told me he talked geopolitics with Henry Kissinger. This is a mind. You know, it's this broadness of mind. So he was aware, he knew, and he never stopped studying. He once told me he had 20 fully studied scores in his head at any given time. So when the time was right, the money was right, the people were right, he was prepared. He never prepared a step. He just was all in his mind. It was all in the music. And that's why it is so pristine, why it fits like that. He would spend 3 years on a score, 5 years. He spent 10 years on Sleeping Beauty, which he could never finally do because of finances and various and sundry other things. But he was a man prepared. He would walk into his room at the then State Theater and 2 pianos, 2 baby grand pianos, and books, just everywhere. And you'd walk past his...
So books and scores.
Oh, yeah, books on philosophy and art history and anything and everything. You know, it's one of the things that drives me crazy now, having worked with people like that, and you see how incredibly prepared they were and how it just poured out of them because they had knowledge. You know, they didn't just have ideas. They had knowledge to support all of these ideas. So that's why these ballets have such dimension. It's not a singular approach to any of this. It's not 2-dimensional. It's not 3-dimensional. There is so much in these ballets. You know, people look at these abstract works and they say, oh, you know, there goes Balanchine again, bunch of steps, and you know, it's all abstract. Aha, it's abstract. But what is abstraction? You know, it's a larger idea that you reduce to its essence, and it becomes poetry. And if you break apart a Balanchine ballet, take a work like Agam, which I had to, every note I had to take apart. I never heard Stravinsky. I didn't know what the hell that was. So the idea is, if you have awareness and knowledge, do something. If you have 3 ideas, do something else. You really have to have dimension. And that's what I miss today. And unfortunately, we are in an era today of brilliant technique, brilliance of technique, body to body, passing on. Mind to mind, I'm not so sure. I'm really not so sure. And it bothers me a whole lot. And that's one of the reasons why I went to Miami to make a company from the ground up, because I wanted to see if I could restage these works in a way they were originally intended. And I owed a debt. Those ballets took care of me my whole dancing time. And therefore, I needed to repay that debt. And I was watching these ballets, and they were dissipating. And so I said, I'm gonna try this. And I had a lunch with Anna Kisselgoff and told her I was going off to Miami and what I had in mind and everything. She could. I don't think anybody quite thought I could handle all of this stuff, because my reputation was basically a defier of Balanchine. I was never a defier of Balanchine, but I knew his class was going to destroy me.
So you know what, let's use that as a segue to see one more clip, because I would like to talk a little bit about Ruby's, and it shows some of the incredible strenuous dancing in addition to the scherzo that you accomplished, and some of the problems that also created for you. So maybe we'll just watch the next clip from, this is from the 67 ballet jewels. This is the section of rubies, music by Stravinsky. And, well, you'll see. I'm going to step aside just so, but you can stay there, Edward, because I could.
By the end of class every day, Villalla's muscles have been warmed up for the tremendous flying leaps he will be making in the strenuous hours of rehearsal and performance that follow. These jumps are from the choreography of rubies.
What happens in a jump is to have everything working for you at the same time. So you get, you explode all at the same time. And it's basically the push from the thighs, from the calves, and lastly, the foot. You have to push from that full platform and then go straight up. You can see that snap of the knee. While at the same time the knee snaps, you also have to flip the foot.
Beginning the rubies pattern again, Villella is rehearsing one of the high points of the rubies performance he will be trying to coax out of his tired and cramped legs. This section contains 100 steps and jumps to the side, backward, forward, revolving and turning corners. But it represents only 40 seconds out of the rubies' 20 minutes. In this spectacular jump, Villella makes 2 turns in the air and lands turning a corner.
It's dark. Okay. That's it. I think that's it. We can take the... Good?
Now, I also have to tell you, I didn't do that in the wings every performance. I staged it. No. What had happened, that was the evening, and I had collapsed on stage in a matinee. I had to dance, Jacques Demoise was injured, so I had to dance Raimonda variations on the matinee, but I also had tarantella. And so by the time I got to the evening, my legs were gone because both Arthur Mitchell and Jacques had been out for about a week or two. So I was dancing whatever I could and whatever roles they couldn't dance. So that's why I was.
But still, it's a tough role, and the physical toll that it took on your body was something you had to.
You know, this is an incredible physicality because there are so many enormous demands made of you on so many levels, and just the technical part of it to isolate energies and attacks and musicalities and so on. That's just one part of it. Then you have to understand the character. You know, who is this guy?
So who is that guy?
Well,
I mean, this is a supposedly abstract ballet, right? So-called.
but
3 movements.
you always have to have a point of departure.
So what was your point of departure for
Well,
this?
my point of departure came from what Balanchine told me. He said, you know, it's Stravinsky, jazz, you know. And I used to love that as a kid. I would do all of that stuff, so, oh yeah. And then he said, you know, it's about a showwoman and a showman, and that's who you are. And that's it. That's all he told me. And we went out, we danced it, and as time was going by, I started to hear a Russian rumba. I started to hear all kinds of other things. And then I heard horses. Horses was one of his points of departure.
And was that his point of departure or yours?
Oh, not mine. Are
Not
you
yours.
kidding? No, his. But
He told you.
Yeah, you began to, and you would see how the girls were lifting their knees and doing all of this. And you know, in the first movement, they start as a necklace. That's how the ballet starts, with all the core people and the soloist in the middle. And she's a very tall lady. And suddenly she comes barreling down the stage at you. It's the filly who got out of the barn. And then later on, there's a pas de cinq with the lady and the 4 boys. It's the 4 grooms grooming the filly. You know, there are so many levels to these ballets. And until you realize all of those things, you don't have a full concept.
And do you think Patty McBride thought that too? Did she get the same story you were getting? Did she think she was a filly, or?
No, but he started to call her Patty McBridle.
So maybe she did think she was a filly.
I don't know what he called me. I don't know.
I bet you do know.
I'm not going to tell you.
Well, he had all those horse blankets, right? What about the horse blanket? He had a lot of horse blankets that he named after the dancers.
He loved horses. He loved the
horses.
Lipenzanos.
Yeah.
And we were, of course, up in Saratoga every summer. And he would go to the track. He would go every Sunday to the track because he loved the horses. And I don't know what year it was, but a group of people, maybe Lincoln or whatever, brought the Lipenzanos to Saratoga. So whatever influenced him and whatever he heard in the music that sounded like things he could relate to, he would do.
And what was your relationship to Patty like in that ballet?
Well, I suddenly realized
I mean, if you're the jockey.
I was the jockey and she was the filly. And again, if you look at the ballet, you will see a lot of reins. You know, it's full of horse-like gestures.
But it's also jazz. I mean,
Oh.
I would never have known that watching it.
Yeah, I mean, that
I would
first,
never have seen that.
well, that first little funky step that I did, those are the only steps I have in my repertoire now. The first step comes from Tarantella. It's a jazz step. Da-da, da-da, da-da. It's a jazz step. So, you know, again, whatever he saw, whatever he heard, is what he did. And he made it work because he knew about enough of it to make it all happen. It was just amazing. And as time went by and you learned more and more about it, you could enrich your approach to what you were doing, to what he had provided you with. Mm-hmm. And this step that other funky little step, it's out of Ruby's. It's a jazz step.
It's out of Ruby's, you said.
Yeah. It's a jazz step out of Ruby's that also had a Russian rumba, in it. And in Symphony of Three Movements, there's a step where the boys have to kind of go around in a circle like this. And he said, you know, back bass shuffle. He loved jazz. If you look closely at his ballets, there's so much jazz in it, but also Stravinsky. It's a lot of jazz. I mean, those composers were influenced by folk dance, you know, just as has been going on for centuries. And there was suddenly this folk music called jazz. And they let that influence their evolution and development. Those are things I think young choreographers should be more and more aware of. That there are so many dimensions that could be used if you knew. And I'm working on a book right now. It's a second book, and really what I want to talk about is the golden age. In the previous century, we had two. One was Diaghilev, and the second was Balanchine. And what came out of that was unbelievable. But I'm not sure anybody knows why these ballets were abstracted the way they were. Because Stravinsky abstracted the music, and Balanchine understood all of those abstractions. I mean, there's a ballet called Stravinsky Violin Concerto. And in that ballet, I mean, it's glorious work. The first movement opens with kind of a sense of Russian folk dance and a sense of jazz underneath it. And underneath that is classical ballet. And underneath that is neoclassicism. And then you get to the two pas de deux that are in the middle. And they are extraordinary. I can't figure them out. And I investigated, I talked to people, I read apocryphally that those two pas de deux were the time when Stravinsky was divorcing his first wife. And those two pas de deux were about the pain that he was feeling, his soon-to-be ex-wife was feeling. And then you look at these pas de deux and they pull out, and then they come back, and then they pull out, and then they come back. And then the finale, of
I'm not
course,
sure if
comes
that's Stravinsky or if that's Balanchine.
Well,
You know, because the music had a certain kind of abstract quality that way, but it's
Yeah.
Balanchine who put the
but these,
drama of the dancers on the,
yeah, but these guys
music.
were pals.
yeah.
You know, as Balanchine said, you know, Stravinsky and I, St. Petersburgers. It's like saying, I'm a New Yorker. It's got the same weight.
Mm-hmm.
New York has the same weight that he was talking about as St.
St.
Petersburg. Miami is not St. Petersburg. Miami is not New York. So you have to understand that. And as a burgeoning artistic director, I had to realize that ballet is all local. It's really what it is. It's local. You can bring to the locality, but you have local culture.
So he brought St. Petersburg to New York and found you.
Whatever.
So, ladies and gentlemen, on that note, we're going to end this part of the discussion, I think, because I don't want to keep us too long, but let us open it up to comments, questions, whatever you might want to talk about with Eddie. Please, speak up.
What are your thoughts on the future of ballet and like how ballet is becoming more of a forgotten art form, I would say? And you mentioned that the ballet and the steps, and you can see it. And I've looked through the libraries and everything, and you see the steps that they do today, and you see the steps that you did, and they're totally different steps. Do you think there's a loss in translation and that we're continuing to do Balanchine work and that we're not doing new emerging choreographers' work?
Well,
There's a lot of...
There's a small question for you.
There's probably like 20 different...
Are you
Yeah,
a
but it's-
dancer?
In a sort.
me too. You know, it's all of a whole, and none of this is different. You show me somebody who knows the original Giselle, somebody who knows the original Swan Lake. That's nonsense. It's, you know, the set pieces are sort of passed on, but the internal understandings and details are not available. So they begin to dissipate. And then we get artistic directors who are hired by small companies, and the small companies can't afford choreography. So they say, we want to do a Swan Lake, and you're going to choreograph it. So it's another level of this mediocrity that goes down. You know, and that's the sad part of this. But there's much more to it than that. Going back, and I remember, you know, when I was 7, 8 years old, the first time I got trapped into, I got hit in the back of the head. My mother was very upset, and I got knocked unconscious, so she was off with my sister at a local ballet school in Queens. So she said, we can't trust you on the streets anymore, so I got dragged to my sister's school. And I look at what I learned there. This was not a person who had had a vast, long professional career at the highest levels. So I learned the very, very beginning, somehow, positions and stuff like that, but that hasn't changed. And I can tell you from experience, because I used to dance all over the country, and a lot of them were associated with schools. And it's the same now. There's a lack of leadership, a lack of understanding, a lack of experience. So the whole field kind of goes along until the next leader. And how do you find another Balanchine? How do you find a Robbins? How do you find a Kirsty who can provide for all of these things? It's not easy. They don't stand on corners. And I had that experience down in Miami. I did 5 years of programming before we opened. But they didn't know what I was talking about. And then when I did, the founder of the company comes to me and says, you know, I don't really like Balanchine. I said, why did you ask me? Where do you think I come from? What do you think I would do here? I'm not interested in your Swan Lakes and Giselles and Sleeping Beauties. That's not my primary interest. I have great regard and respect for the past, but I don't want to look forward to my past. You know, you need to be stimulated on an ongoing basis if you have a mind like that. And I had a mind like that, which wanted to know what happened and why. And the most important question for me was why. You know, why do you do it that way? I never yelled at a dancer. I would always say, why are you doing it that way? Well, you know, isn't it supposed? No. But let me tell you why. Let me tell you why. Why did he do this gesture? And how does that relate to your relationships? And how does it relate to the music and the ballet? And, you know, it's all interconnected. But you see, we are in this age of technique. And the technique has never been greater than it is now. But as that technique has been doing this, the other parts of it have become less important. And it becomes this, it's like the competitions today. And last year, I think I was head of the jury in USA, whatever they call it, this competition, USA competition. And it was sad to watch because it was all about pyrotechnical, ingenious tricks. And I didn't know if I was watching gymnastics or classical ballet. You know, it's a whole other world. And this is the thing that I am really, really concerned about. I'm concerned about, I'm not talking about ABT, New York City Ballet, San Francisco people. They're there, you know, they're there. It's the companies below that really need the artistic directors, the choreographers, the ballet mistresses, all of those people. How do you stage a Balanchine ballet if you don't know what the hell it's about? You shouldn't be staging it. It's just that simple. I mean, I do nothing but talk. You could see I could talk. I want to explain it. I was desperate to have it. Nobody really gave me those internal understandings. A little bit at a time, Stanley Williams comes along and oh my God, it's a whole other thing. And now I'm seeing so much more. And poor young dancers, you know, I go and watch this brilliant technique and a smile, nothing behind the smile. There's nothing going on. Nothing going on.
Let's let other people, and then you can continue that later. Yes. And
Mr. Edward, in the last few days, we all have been shocked by terrible news and the world in general. Certainly, culture and dance and ballet brings us all together to see a performance and a piece. And it involves the participation of many people on stage and behind it. You've talked about technique and the advancement in the arts. How do you think that and the messages behind each production can help us all become a more informed, a more tolerant, and in a way a more open society? How can companies and people and those artists who dance transmit or project a message that can help the world?
It's not very complicated. It's information. And my point of departure was I had experience and information that I could give to dancers. And dancers are hungry. I started with 19 dancers, none of whom had any kind of Balanchinian background. And the first 7 years I focused on Balanchine. So I said, how do I get these people to move this way? I put a class together. And within this, there were all of these syncopations and attacks and all of this stuff. So I was teaching them about Balanchine without telling them. And so they were just absorbing it. And it was new, it was fresh. My syncopations were, once they got the syncopations, they got proud of the abilities to do 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 1. You know, these are what the ballets were like. You know, you don't dance a Stravinsky ballet like this. You know, the meter changes all the time, the whole, it's information. And the problem is that there's not enough information from the leadership. And again, I talk mostly about artistic directors, choreographers, you know, all of those people who have their hands on these things. And if they can't pass this on, they can pass on again to you physically. But internally, why did he do that gesture? Why? Why? Whoops.
We understand that. You can come down there.
Why did he do that? You know, well, it's Greek. So it was, you know, anyway. So I think again, we need more leadership. People who have awarenesses, backgrounds, and curiosity. And sometimes I run to, you know, I used to get dozens of DVDs when I was an artistic director. And I would look at these things, and the choreography was kind of interesting, but it said nothing. It went nowhere. There was no beginning, middle, or end. And there were not these dimensions in it. If you got two dimensions, great, you know, great. 3 dimensions, great. But it doesn't have that sense of longevity unless there is a complication involved. Now, a Balanchine complication is nothing but a series of simplicities if you break it down. You know, great art is simple. It's just very simple. And the simplicity ends up making the apparent complexity. You know, so if you have the patience to take these things apart, or if you have a knowledge enough to want to take these things apart, it's rich. It's much richer than you think, because now you're thinking, and it is rich.
Oh, I guess I'm supposed to call, right? Well, let's take one back there since you're there, Kaylee. Yeah, and then.
This is a question for either Mr. Villella or Ms. Homans. Both of you, in addition to being dancers, are also writers, historians, scholars. And I wonder if either of you would like to speak to how you see your role in the scholarly tradition of dance history.
What was the last couple of words?
How you see your role in the tradition of dance history, in the scholarship of dance history. Well, I guess, yeah, all right, I'll field that one.
No, I'm happy to do it. I just don't want to.
So, yes, I'm a historian. I was a dancer. How do I see my role? I mean, really that. I'm a writer, I'm a historian. What I try to do is study things, and in a way, it's what Edward was saying. It's about information and knowledge, and I'm in the great position of my job being to go out and find out things that I don't know. And so I try to find out things I don't know and then express them in a very, very clear way that other people can understand and appreciate, and I try to also make my comment while I'm doing that. So that it's not just the information, but the information also has, and I think this is one of the really important things that I have always taken away from what you're saying, is that you have to have a point of view as well. You can't just say what happened. You have to say what happened from a point of view. So you have to have an opinion about it. And people say, oh, that's opinionated, but opinionated to me is good, because after all, why are we all here if we don't have a view? So that's the tradition that I see myself in, because that is the historical tradition, not just the dance historical tradition, but the tradition of writing history, just as there is a tradition of creating dances. That's part of that history too.
The way I see I don't know. First of all, I'm not an intellectual, number one. I have a Bachelor of Science degree in marine transportation.
And he's taught at West Point, right?
I was...
so another thing I really wanted to talk to you about. But
I was artist in residence at West Point for a year. That was a trip. But, you know, look, for me, I'm not a writer. I'm a talker. I can talk. I've done a book. In that book, what I did was I talked forever into a tape recorder. And then I got a writer to structure it. And the first thing I said to him was, I'm not a writer, and I don't want this to sound like I'm a writer. I'm not. But please, my voice, that is the most important part of all of this. My points of departure, my, forgive me, personality, where I came from, how I view all of these things. And that's not an intellectual. It's a very, very lucky person who was around at a time when there were geniuses. And some of that stuff rubbed off. And it affected me in a way. I mean, I was despondent for 4 years, not dancing. I mean, I had made high school in 3 years, so I could be a dancer sooner. And then my sister quit, and my father said, that's it. He was very unhappy his son wore tights. He just didn't want that. And so to be away from it for 4 years, and then to want it so badly, and to put my face into it, and find out how much more there was, how enriching all of this stuff was. What do I do now? Pass it on. So that's kind of my place right now. If anybody wants me to come and coach roles, I just came from Washington, coached Tarantella, I did stuff with Pacific Northwest, the Joffrey, University of Arizona, who has a very, very good dance program and an excellent ballet teacher there. And I enjoyed working with those people and providing more, and they were at a very, very nice level. So that's kind of the way I feel.
it's an oral history.
Well, sure.
It's a physical history.
I don't ever want to raise money again. And I never want to work for a board again. Because they don't know enough, bless their hearts. They're all well-meaning people, and then ego arrives. And, you know, I mean, down in Miami, I was with my wife, and we were up in the boxes in the mezzanine, and in their wisdom, our board decided they would all sit in the first row. It's the worst place you can watch ballet, is the first row. That's where they wanted to sit. Curtain would come down, light would come up, they would stand up and turn around and face the audience so they could be seen. You know, this, It's human.
It's the court of Louis XIV, all over again.
You think people are different? They're not. No matter what it is, people are people. And unless you understand that, don't do it. Don't do it.
One more.
One of the things I find lacking when Balanchine isn't staged well is the kind of nuance and precision of musicality that those, sorry. Do I have to repeat?
No, keep going.
Is the sort of nuance and precision and musicality that those of you who actually worked with Balanchine dance with. I mean, you in particular, you were such an extraordinarily musical dancer. I know it's a big subject, but can you talk a bit about how you feel Balanchine imbued all of you with such a rich musicality, and how you try to pass on that variegated musicality to your own dancers whom you teach?
Well, I would start with jazz and syncopations because, again, that was a major point of departure for him. But if you listen to jazz, I mean, it is, really good stuff. And I based my class, for instance, on jazz because too much is done 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm not interested in 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. I'm interested in what happens just before 1 and right after 1, and then it's all the stuff in between. So we become so rote on the music, just passing through the note and how you then attack the next note. And what's in between influences and sometimes is the primary idea. But when I first started doing Agon, he was showing me this. I did the first pas de trois, and there was a moment where the protagonist goes, bam, and there was this high note, bam. So I would go, bam, silence. And he said, no, it's the wrong note. I said, but Mr. B, it's the high note. But kick on the silence. I want the audience to hear the silence. You know, it's a different way to approach, to think, to train your mind, to seek all of those incredible things that these guys provided for us. And they disguise it. You know, they don't make it obvious. Balanchine never wanted to talk about his work or how he approached it. He would give you hints and things like that. He never wanted to be shot. You know, this video with rubies in it. He was making a ballet for me. And they were shooting me for a year, cinema verite. So I said, Mr. B, can they come in? He said, fine, but don't shoot me. I said, fine, okay. He just...
He didn't want to be shot. He didn't want to be in the film. No, not at all. You got to know him by his works. And that's why I feel with Miami, I don't have to defend anything. You just look at the works. You know, judge me by my work. I think that's a good way for us to close things up. Thank you very much for coming. Please join us for a reception.